Before the success stories, the progress, there was you. You who made a choice to grow, to inspire, to overcome your own challenges. At NASM, we're in service of your limitless potential, because when you keep growing, we all get stronger, and we'll never stop making your journey our mission. Join the fitness leader. Become a fitness leader. Become a certified personal trainer.
You're listening to the Peak Physique Podcast with Andre Adams on the NASM Podcast Network.
Hey guys, welcome back to another exciting episode of the Peak Physique Podcast. I'm your host, Andre Adams, NASM Master Trainer and IFBB Physique Olympian. Today's episode, I'm going to break down everything you guys need to know about waist trainers. Are they good? Are they safe? Are they effective? I'm sure you guys have seen them over the years become more popular on social media, especially among the bodybuilding community with physique athletes. So let's kick things off there. What are waist trainers and what are they even used for? So if you think about back in the old days, long before physique was even a thing, oftentimes women would actually wear these to help shape the body, right? To give that hourglass figure shape. And these could be made of different materials, which we'll highlight in a second here. But ultimately, they're trying to help enhance that kind of shoulder to waist to hip ratio and show off that small waist. Now, are those benefits permanent once you take the waist trainer off? Typically, no. However, there's a lot that you guys need to know about in terms of how to effectively use these in a very safe manner to make sure you don't add any risk or injury or anything like that that could be counterproductive to a physique goal. So there's a few different materials that the waist trainers can be used or created from, we'll call it. And, the one that I prefer is typically that latex kind of neoprene rubber style. I try to avoid the ones that have those hard spiny ribs, those kind of bony rib plates in them. Those can tend to be a bit too aggressive for some people. But there's also the kind that attach with Velcro. Think of more like less of a waist trainer, more of a sweat belt style. They have the kind that have metal hooks in them, right? Where there's a series of different rows that are adjustable as your waist starts to shrink. And then there's also the kind that are more corset style with the strings that you would tighten over time. Personally, I do prefer if you're going to use one, and there's also zippers in there too, zip up style. But I do prefer the kind that are adjustable so that over time, if you're on your physique journey, your weight loss journey, and you do decide to incorporate one of these tools in, you have the ability to tighten it so that you can, progress it over time as your waistline naturally shrinks just from bodybuilding and contest prep, right? Just from leaning out. But in effect, what the waist trainers are doing is really squeezing or compressing that stomach, and that, the core, we'll call it. There's a lot of muscles involved there. Obviously, a lot of organs and things that are a part of that area of the body. So we need to be conscious of how much pressure is being applied and for how long. So let's back up a second. We'll talk about how did they even become popular in something like physique or bodybuilding. And you can think about it as it's a cosmetic tool, right? So it's for an aesthetic goal. Clearly, bodybuilding and physique is more of the aesthetic goal in that spectrum of fitness, as opposed to like a strength athlete, a CrossFitter, or something like this. And genetics do play a big role in whether or not an athlete may or may not decide to use something like a waist trainer. If you genetically have a crazy X frame, a really solid V taper with a tiny waist, you probably don't need to even worry about doing anything like this, right? And it's all about proportion. So you got to think about this. Even if you don't have a small waist, what are the ways that we can give the illusion of a small waist on stage? Well, one is I can improve my proportions by making the lats and shoulders bigger. I can make the outer quad sweeps and the glutes a little bit bigger, right? This is going to proportionally make the waist look smaller. If you understand your angles on stage, you'll be able to orient your waist, maybe a slight angle towards the front of the stage. So maybe instead of standing straight on, you got your hips rotated about 30 degrees, but your shoulders are straight on to give you this nice V taper. And then even, I call it sitting back into that back hip, right? So we're pushing the hips an extra 2 to 3 inches away from the judges while leaving those shoulders a little bit closer, or the quads a little bit closer to the judges. And again, this is a depth perception thing, right? When you close one eye, you look at both hands. The one that is further away just looks smaller because you can't comprehend the depth perception with just one eye. Very similar effect when we're pushing that waist back further from the judges, right? It's all perspective and illusion. Now, we can enhance that with something like a waist trainer. And for those of you that aren't as genetically gifted and don't have this teeny tiny waist to begin with, or maybe you started at a very heavy weight and you have a lot of weight to get rid of, for women, a lot of times postpartum, they're going to have weaker core muscles and maybe a little bit of extra adipose tissue and body fat in the abs. So they oftentimes will opt to use something like a waist trainer. Now, there's several reasons that a bodybuilder might want to use it. One is to compress the core. The other is basically using it in, we'll say, as a substitute for something like a sweat belt, where you're trying to create more heat, right? Exhaust more sweat and help lean out the core a little bit faster. So I see it used in both of those ways in bodybuilding, but honestly, I think they became the most popular over the last decade or so, really from social media. So a lot of influencers, you've got athletes, coaches, and then a bit of tribal knowledge within the bodybuilding community as another tool that's being used to help shrink up that waist over time. So we talked a little bit on what the different types of waist trainers are, right? Neoprene, latex, with and without the hard spiny ribs, etc. Different attachment styles, zipper style, Velcro hooks, the corset tie style. And then, let's stop and think through, are they effective at truly shrinking the waistline for a physique athlete? And does it help you really increase your hourglass or your X-frame shape on stage? And you're going to hear this debated until the end of time. You'll have some people that swear by them, some people that, they're highly opposed to them because of the different risks and, or they just believe that they're ineffective altogether. Just from my personal experience, between myself as an Olympian level physique athlete and also, as a coach, contest prep coach of several hundred athletes over the years, I do think that there are some benefits when they're utilized properly. However, I do think the majority of people get it wrong and they rely on it as a tool that they believe is just shrinking the waist. In reality, sometimes they're actually just weakening the core muscles. And when they take that waist trainer off, just like when you take a corset off and then they relax, right, that abdominal wall and the transverse abdominals are actually weaker, right? So they have trouble holding their abs tight on stage and pulling everything in. It's the same muscles, in fact, that you would use when you're doing a vacuum pose, right? So when we're pulling inward, we're pulling that wall inwards towards the spine. That's the transverse abdominal. Those are the muscles that sometimes get jeopardized or they get overlooked and are not trained. So we're going to talk about some of the ways to mitigate the risk of an underactive core so that you can actually get the most out of your waist trainer. And then I think the most important thing we're going to really harp on today is, are they safe? Right? There's going to be a lot of debate on this, but just to throw out a few of the risks that people should be aware of if they are, used maybe too long, too tight, or again, it's just maybe not a good fit for that specific individual. GI and digestive issues, definitely top of the list. That's probably the first and most common thing that I believe people might experience some risk of side effects. You could have issues like gas, acid reflux, bloating, heartburn, even a bit of constipation. And the reason why, if you can just picture, you've got all of your internal organs, right? You've got your liver, kidneys, pancreas, spleen, etc., all in this area. And if we're compressing everything, what are we, in effect doing? Inside, we're potentially shifting the placement of some of these organs a bit, right? And again, this applies more to the ones that are excessively abusing waist trainers or they're way too tight and, they're trying to get that waistline way too small. Again, you could be displacing some of the positioning of the organs, squeezing or putting pressure on the GI tract that could impact digestion and give you some different issues. So definitely, if you're getting those issues, doesn't necessarily mean you need to completely stop using your waist trainer, but you might want to rethink the style or the amount of pressure that you're applying or again, how long you happen to be wearing that waist trainer. And, it is squeezing and compressing the sternum, even the rib cage too, right? Some people just genetically have a bit wider rib cage. You'll see this quite often actually with a lot of physique or bikini athletes. And sometimes the genetics, they just are what they are, right? If you're going to do something extreme, like get a rib remove, which I definitely don't recommend, there's only so much you can do to shrink that up. And that's where you come back to really increasing the proportions of the lats, the quads, the glutes, and things like this. And the biggest risk of, are they safe or not? Again, is just really being conscious of not overly weakening the core and shifting the organs. There's also one minor risk too of skin dermal issues. So if you're using it direct contact on the skin and, you break a good sweat, maybe you're using some fat burning thermogenic cream underneath your waist trainer or your sweat belt. If you continue to do that all the time and you're not washing it, some people are more sensitive than others. They can start to develop a rash or, a bacterial dermal infection. So make sure that you're keeping the waist trainer itself clean, or I actually prefer to put my thermo cream on first, and then I'll put a t-shirt on, and then I'll put my, if I'm doing a waist trainer or a sweat belt, it goes on top of the t-shirt, where you can just wash the t-shirt and it's not direct skin contact. If you guys are just joining us right now, you are on the Peak Physique Podcast. I'm your host, Andre Adams, and we are breaking down everything you guys need to know about waist trainers for the physique athlete. We talked about different types of waist trainers, some of the potential risks if waist trainers are not utilized properly, and then some of the benefits, right, of really shrinking up that waistline to improve that hourglass physique. So let's keep going there, right? We talked about some of the potential risks. So let's talk about how to, what are the best practices on how to effectively use them and mitigate those risks. Some of the things I like to say for just general safety, wear them definitely less than 8 hours a day. And that's something that you normally start out kind of like if you guys have ever used a back support for a postural brace, you start out with an hour or two a day and you work your way up. It's going to be a similar concept with a waist trainer. Start out with 1 to 2 hours a day. If you feel good there, you don't have any side effects or issues, and you want to start to increase that over time each week, try adding another hour or two, maximum 7 to 8 hours a day. Definitely don't go to sleep in them. You should not be sleeping or wearing the waist trainer overnight. The other thing I've seen is people will wear the waist trainer and they'll, squeeze that core as hard as they can. And then they'll put a really stiff weightlifting belt on top of it, like a 4-inch belt, and then really just choke that down on the waist. And at some point that could be a bit too much. And again, you could start to displace the internal organs and run into some of those issues that we just talked about. So avoid wearing them overnight, and to avoid any of the dermal issues, again, make sure that you're constantly washing it, keeping that clean. Try to avoid direct contact with the skin. And the other thing that you can do to mitigate some of the effects on the physique and the skeletal muscle issues is simply don't stop training your core, right? The same thing can happen over time, for athletes that choose to wear, let's say, a very stiff weight belt, especially the 6-inch ones, where it's very rigid and they're choking that thing down and they're doing 100% of their workout, even things that aren't necessarily involving the back, they're using the weight belt to restrict down the core. So same effect there, right? We can start to actually weaken the trunk and the core muscles, which there's some pros and cons. On stage, it's good to have a small waist. We don't want to thicken the core or the waistline. However, if you guys think about how hard it is to develop a muscle, think about the biceps. How hard is it for you to develop a bicep? Well, the reality is we've got to train that bicep over and over. We got to progressively overload. We got to feed that bicep, and we got to keep breaking down muscle tissue and progressing that over time. So it doesn't happen by accident, right? And you're not going to build that much core muscle by accident either. But if you're relying on the waist trainer to shrink up the waist by itself, and you eliminate your core training, which a lot of female athletes, actually, I've seen bikini wellness figure, they are afraid of thickening the core. So they stop training the core altogether, use the waist trainer, probably too much over time. And then when they take it off on stage, again, the low abs are a bit distended and it just doesn't look quite as aesthetic, right? It's not as tight as it should be. So I encourage, if you're going to wear the waist trainers, continue to train your core as well. Now, you don't have to do anything crazy. You shouldn't be doing, decline sit-ups in a 50-pound weighted vest or anything by any means like that. But you could be definitely focusing on the transverse abdominals and some of those intrinsic core stabilizers. So again, the transverse abdominals, some of my favorite movements there. Practice your vacuums. So when you exhale everything out of the diaphragm, completely blow out all your air, and then you try to pull that navel in towards your spine and you create that vacuum shape. I like to do those a few times a day, let's say for 3 to 5 minutes, anywhere from 2 to 4 times a week. If you've got time, do it more, but definitely focus on pulling inward, right? That's mimicking the benefit that you're getting from the waist trainer in the first place. Now, some other exercises that you could do or program into your training could be the ab roller wheel, actually one of my absolute favorites. And that's going to help draw in that waistline over time. So I try to hit that for myself and our athletes. Again, anywhere from 2 to 4 times a week, either post cardio or post workout, when my body is pretty much deficient of glucose and we're starting to really just churn through body fat. That's where I spend an extra 10, 15 minutes, really just targeting the abs and specific for this instance, the transverse abdominals. But anything else that challenges core stabilization, you could do planks, you could do inchworms, dead bugs, TRX type movements. Any of these things that help stabilize that core are going to go a long way. And again, it's complementary to what you're doing with the waist trainer. So you shouldn't necessarily do just one or the other. I like to do those in tandem so that we're getting the maximum benefit out of that. And that's really all I have for you guys today on waist trainers. I'm sure there'll be other questions that come up, but my conclusion is waist trainers can definitely be a useful tool for any physique athlete, especially those of us that are not genetically gifted with that hourglass shape or that tiny waistline. Just make sure to use them properly. Avoid anything that's going to put excessive pressure or excessively long durations in the waist trainer. We want to make sure that we're following safe practices, keep them clean, and then don't forget to strengthen your core. And I promise you will get the most out of that waist trainer. Guys, if you enjoyed this episode and you're enjoying the Peak Physique podcast in general, I encourage you to please share with at least one friend, and we will see you guys back on the next episode of Peak Physique Podcast.